London, 1888. The fog rolls in over narrow cobblestone streets. Gas lamps flicker weakly in night, casting long shadows that dance across soot-stained brick walls. In the heart of Whitechapel, a place already burdened by poverty, disease, and crime, a new terror awakens. Women vanish into the darkness, only to be found hours later, their bodies mutilated in ways so gruesome that even hardened detectives are shaken to their core. The killer leaves no name, no face, no trace, only a legend, signed in blood and remembered by history as Jack the Ripper. This is not just the story of a murderer. It is a story of fear gripping an entire city, of a manhunt that spans centuries, and of the mystery that still endures. Who is Jack the Ripper? To understand the Ripper murders, we must first understand the world in which they took place. The late 19th century was a time of immense change for London. The city had grown into the beating heart of the British Empire, wealthy, powerful, and modern. But beneath the polished surface lay a darker truth. The East End, particularly Whitechapel, was a neighborhood choked with poverty. Tens of thousands of people lived in overcrowded slums, where families crammed into single rooms and children went to bed hungry. Unemployment was rampant. Alcohol flowed cheaply. Brothels and lodging houses sprang up on every corner, offering desperate women a way to earn a living, even at great personal risk. Crime was common, but life itself was harder. Tuberculosis, syphilis, and malnutrition plagued the streets. A journalist at the time described Whitechapel as a maze of misery, where the stench of refuse and desperation hung heavy in the air. And it was here, in these shadowy alleys, that Jack the Ripper began his reign of terror. The story officially begins on August 31st, 1888. That night, the body of Marion Nichols, known as Polly, was discovered in Bucks Row. She was 43 years old, a mother, and a woman who had turned to sex work to survive. Her throat had been slashed so deeply that it nearly severed her head. Her abdomen was mutilated with savage cuts. Polly's murder shocked the police, but in Whitechapel, violent deaths were not entirely unusual. At first, investigators considered a robbery or a drunken brawl gone wrong. But within days, another killing made it clear something far more sinister was at play. On September 8th, 1888, Annie Chapman was found in the backyard of a lodging house. Her throat was cut, her body brutally mutilated, and organs removed with chilling precision. Witnesses had seen her alive only hours before, talking to a man described as foreign-looking and wearing a dark coat. The press picked up the story. Rumors swirled through Whitechapel, and a sense of dread settled over London. But worse was yet to come. On the night of September 30th, 1888, Jack the Ripper struck again, not once, but twice. At 1 a.m., the body of Elizabeth Stride was discovered in Dutfield's yard. Her throat was slashed, but unlike the previous victims, her body showed no mutilation. Some believe the Ripper was interrupted before he could finish his work. But less than an hour later, only a short distance away, another body was found. This time, the killer had time to indulge his horrifying ritual. Catherine Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square. Her throat was cut, her face savagely disfigured, and her abdomen torn open with surgical-like skill. A kidney was missing. This gruesome night became known as the double event. And for the first time, the police and public fully realized they were dealing with something unprecedented, a serial killer before the term even existed. The fear was no longer confined to Whitechapel. It spread across the entire city. As the killings escalated, so too did the media frenzy. Newspapers competed to sell copies with lurid details, often exaggerating or inventing information. It was in this climate that letters began arriving at police stations and newsrooms, signed by someone calling himself Jack the Ripper. The most famous of these is a Dear Boss letter, dated September 25th, 1888. Written in red ink, it mocked the police, boasting of future murders and signed with a chilling pseudonym. Another, the Saucy Jackie postcard, referred specifically to the double event, describing how the killer had been interrupted during Stride's murder. Most notorious of all was a From Hell letter, sent to George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. It came with half of a preserved human kidney, allegedly taken from Catherine Eddowes. The handwriting was crude, the spelling poor, But the message was clear. The Ripper was toying with the authorities. To this day, debate rages over whether these letters were truly from the killer or hoaxes created by journalists. But the name Jack the Ripper was born here and would echo through history. The last canonical victim attributed to Jack the Ripper was Mary Jane Kelly, murdered on November 9, 1888. Unlike the previous victims, Mary Jane was killed indoors in her small rented room at Miller's Court. The crime scene was beyond anything investigators had ever witnessed. Her body was mutilated with such ferocity that even hardened detectives struggled to describe it. The press called it the most ghastly spectacle ever beheld. And then, just as suddenly as the killings had begun, they stopped. No more bodies appeared in Whitechapel bearing the Ripper's signature. The police had no arrest, no trial, no closure. London was left with fear and a mystery that would endure for more than a century. The Metropolitan Police launched one of the largest investigations in their history. Detectives interviewed hundreds of witnesses, patrolled the streets at night, and even brought in bloodhounds to track the killer. But they faced impossible odds. Forensic science as we know it today simply didn't exist. There were no fingerprints, no DNA testing, no surveillance cameras. The streets of Whitechapel were crowded, chaotic, and filled with false leads. At one point, a message written in chalk was found near one of the crime scenes. It read, "The jurors are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." The cryptic message was quickly erased by police officials fearing anti-Semitic riots. But it added yet another layer of mystery to the case. Public outrage grew. Citizens accused the police of incompetence. Vigilante groups patrolled the streets. Politicians demanded answers. But the killer remained one step ahead. By now, Jack the Ripper was more than a criminal. He was a sensation. The murders dominated headlines around the world. The press fueled panic with lurid sketches and dramatic speculation. Ordinary citizens whispered about the killer in pubs and marketplaces, wondering if he might be the man sitting beside them. The women of Whitechapel lived in terror. Yet many had no choice but to keep walking the streets at night. Poverty offered no escape. Meanwhile, the legend of the Ripper began to grow. He was not seen as just a man, but as a phantom, an invisible predator haunting the streets of London. Even during the investigation, the police and public speculated about possible suspects. Some believed the killer was a foreign immigrant, blending into the dense population of Eastern European Jews who had fled to Whitechapel. Others insisted he must be a doctor or surgeon, given the precision of the mutilations. A few even suggested the killer came from the upper classes, a wealthy man who stalked the poor as part of a sadistic game. Though the names varied, one thing was certain: Jack the Ripper was no longer just a murderer. He was a puzzle, a shadow, a legend in the making. By the end of 1888, London was on edge. The murders had stopped, but the fear had not. Anyone could be the Ripper. Any shadow could conceal him. The case files swelled with reports, sightings, and suspects. Detectives pored over testimonies late into the night, but their quarry always slipped through their fingers. The people of Whitechapel returned to their lives, scarred by memory but forced to carry on. The city moved forward, but the legend lingered. From the very beginning, the police collected names, dozens, even hundreds, of potential suspects. Some were quickly ruled out. Others, however, have haunted the case for over a century. Let us walk through the most infamous men ever suspected of being Jack the Ripper. Montague John Druitt was a barrister and schoolteacher. By most accounts, he lived a respectable life. But in December of 1888, just weeks after Mary Jane Kelly's brutal murder, Druitt was found dead. His body pulled from the River Thames after an apparent suicide. Why is he considered a suspect? Some officials at the time believed Druitt had been mentally unstable. His own family allegedly suspected he might have been the Ripper. The timing of his death coincided suspiciously with the sudden end of the killings. However, there is little direct evidence connecting him to the crimes. He was middle class, educated, and not known to haunt Whitechapel streets. Still, the mystery of his suicide keeps his name alive in Ripper lore. Perhaps the most famous suspect of all is Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-born Jewish immigrant who worked as a barber in Whitechapel. Kosminski suffered from severe mental illness, hearing voices and displaying violent tendencies. He was eventually committed to an asylum, where he lived out the rest of his days. In the late 19th century, senior police officials pointed Kosminski as the prime suspect. But at the time, they lacked sufficient evidence to arrest or convict him. In 2014, more than a century later, researchers claimed DNA evidence from a shawl found at Catherine Eddowes' murder scene linked Kosminski to the crime. The story made headlines worldwide, but experts remained divided. Critics argue the DNA testing was flawed, contaminated, or inconclusive. Did modern science unmask Jack the Ripper, or simply add another layer of uncertainty? Another suspect was Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born conman, thief, and career criminal. He was known for violent behavior, and some believed he had surgical skills. Police reports at the time included his name, but historians later found little to connect him to the Whitechapel murders. In fact, he may not even have been in England during the killings. Still, his reputation as a dangerous man ensured his place on the suspect list. George Chapman, born Severin Klosowski in Poland, worked as a barber surgeon before moving to London. Years after the Ripper murders, Chapman was convicted of poisoning 3 of his wives. He was executed in 1903. But during his trial, police officers privately wondered if he might also have been Jack the Ripper. After all, Chapman lived in Whitechapel during the murders. He had medical training. He killed women. He fit the profile. But poisoning is far removed from the brutal mutilations of the Ripper killings. Could one man really commit both kinds of crimes? One of the more controversial theories points to Walter Sickert, an English painter associated with the Impressionist movement. The idea was popularized by author Patricia Cornwell, who argued that Sickert's artwork reflected knowledge of the crimes, and that letters written by Jack the Ripper contained traces of his DNA. Critics, however, dismissed the theory as speculative. Sickert was fascinated by the murders, but fascination does not equal guilt. Many argue that Cornwell's evidence is circumstantial at best. Still, the image of a celebrated artist secretly being one of history's most notorious killers has captured the imagination of many. No Ripper story is complete without conspiracy. One of the most sensational theories suggests that Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria and second in line to the throne, was Jack the Ripper. This theory claims the murders were part of a cover-up, hiding a royal scandal involving the prince and a working-class mistress. According to this tale, high-ranking officials orchestrated the killings to silence women who knew too much. But historians find no credible evidence linking the prince to the crimes. Records place him elsewhere during key murders. The theory, while dramatic, is almost certainly fiction. Yet the idea of a royal conspiracy ensured that Jack the Ripper's legend grew beyond crime, into myth. Beyond the famous names, countless other suspects have been proposed. Local butchers and slaughterhouse workers, skilled with knives, doctors and surgeons, believed to have anatomical knowledge. Sailors, who came and went through London's docks, vanished conveniently after the killings. Each possibility makes sense, and yet none are definitive. The truth is, Jack the Ripper could have been a man whose name we never knew. Someone lost in history, who walked those gaslit streets, killed, and then disappeared forever. Over the decades, technology has advanced. Today, we can analyze DNA, reconstruct timelines, and apply criminal profiling. The DNA claim pointing to Aaron Kosminski remains the most famous scientific attempt to solve the case. But because the evidence was over a century old and the chain of custody questionable, many experts remain unconvinced. Criminal profilers, looking at the case with modern eyes, suggest the Ripper was likely a local man, familiar with Whitechapel streets, perhaps socially invisible, someone poor, unremarkable, and unnoticed. In other words, not a prince, not a painter, not a doctor, just an ordinary man who committed extraordinary horrors. Why does Jack the Ripper still fascinate us, more than a century later? Perhaps it is because he was never caught, because his identity remains a blank space where imagination runs wild. Perhaps it is because his crimes coincided with the birth of mass media, creating the first global crime story. Or perhaps it is because the Ripper is more than a man now. He is a symbol of fear, of violence against women, of the darkness that can lurk in any city at any time. Every new suspect, Every new theory, every new book or film keeps the legend alive. But the truth may be forever beyond our reach. Picture it once more. The narrow alleys, the flickering gas lamps, the silence of midnight broken by footsteps. Somewhere in that darkness, in 1888, a figure stalked his victims. He left no face, no name, only shadows. Jack the Ripper may never be unmasked, but his story continues to haunt us, reminding us of the fragility of safety, the cruelty of violence, and the enduring power of mystery. And so, the question remains, who is Jack the Ripper? A desperate schoolteacher? A tormented immigrant? A mad doctor? Or simply a faceless predator lost to history? Perhaps we will never know. But the legend of Jack the Ripper endures, not only as a tale of horror, but as one of history's most haunting mysteries. If you found this journey through the fog of Whitechapel fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you won't miss our next deep dive into history's greatest mysteries.